I cheated on my husband, and now I suspect he's seeing another woman. I'm 30, he's 27, and we were supposed to have the perfect marriage. You know, the kind that everyone envies. I mean, we had it all: laughter, plans for the future, endless love, or so it seemed. Looking back, I think we were living in some glossy version of reality, pretending the cracks weren't there until they split us apart. The illusion shattered spectacularly when I, in a moment of absolute idiocy, cheated on my husband, Jake. The affair was brief, impulsive, and deeply regrettable. It happened with a colleague, a man who listened, who paid attention to me in ways Jake hadn't for months. I don't know what possessed me. Maybe it was the thrill, maybe the loneliness. But the moment it was over, a wave of guilt crashed over me, threatening to drown me in shame. I felt like I had torn apart the fabric of our life together, and I couldn't keep it hidden. I couldn't live with the lie festering inside me, so I confessed. The memory of that confession is etched into my mind. It was the hardest conversation I've ever had. I stood there, trembling, eyes brimming with tears, and told Jake everything. I expected anger, maybe yelling, a storm of emotions, but what I got was far worse. He just looked at me, a long, penetrating gaze that made my stomach twist. "I need time to think," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. I felt my world crumbling, but I clung to him, begging for another chance. "Please, Jake, let me fix this," I pleaded, feeling desperate and broken. He agreed, but his agreement was tinged with a cold, detached acceptance. From that moment on, he became a different man, a stranger living under the same roof. Jake's demeanor shifted from loving husband to a courteous roommate. He was polite, even kind, but there was an icy indifference beneath the surface, a chasm of distance between us. He didn't yell, didn't fight, didn't show any visible anger. Instead, he withdrew into himself, and that hurt more than any argument ever could. Determined to make amends, I threw myself into being the best wife imaginable. I cooked his favorite meals, put thoughtful little gifts on his nightstand, even tried to rekindle our intimacy. I seduced him every night, hoping to remind him of the connection we once shared. He responded out of duty, I think, rather than desire. His smiles were small and devoid of warmth, his touch felt mechanical. It was like trying to embrace a shadow. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't grasp the man I once knew. Then, 2 weeks ago, everything shifted again. Jake started coming home late, very late. Nights stretched into early mornings, and when he did return, he went straight to bed, offering no explanations. My attempts to ask him about his whereabouts were met with the same cold reply: "It's not your business." The words stung, a cruel echo of the distance growing between us. My imagination ran wild. Where was he? Who was he with? The thought of Jake seeking solace in someone else's arms haunted me, a torment I felt I deserved but couldn't bear. The uncertainty gnawed at me, growing into a gnawing fear that consumed my every waking thought. My stomach churned every time he left the house, wondering if tonight would be the night he found comfort in someone who wasn't me. I needed to know the truth. The not knowing was worse than anything I could imagine. So, I decided to follow him. I remember that night vividly. He left around 8 p.m., mentioning some vague work meeting. My heart raced as I tailed his car, feeling like a character in a cheap detective novel. He drove to a cafe on the outskirts of town, a place we had never been to together. I parked a few blocks away, my hands trembling as I watched him through the window. Jake met a woman there, a tall, elegant figure with long, dark hair. They hugged briefly before sitting down. From my vantage point, their conversation seemed animated, their faces lit by the cafe's soft glow. There was an intimacy in their interaction that twisted my stomach into knots. They looked like a couple deeply engrossed in each other, sharing a connection I longed for but couldn't reclaim. Tears welled up in my eyes as I watched them, feeling my heart break with each passing minute. After what felt like an eternity, they left the cafe together, still engrossed in conversation. They walked to his car, and she got in with him. My mind raced with possibilities, each one more painful than the last. Were they going to a hotel? Was she someone he had met recently, or had she been a hidden part of his life all along? I followed them to a residential area, my thoughts a whirlwind of dread and despair. They parked outside a small, quaint house, I watched as they entered together, the door closing behind them. The sight of Jake walking into another woman's home was a punch to the gut. I turned off the engine and sat there, my mind reeling, feeling utterly and completely alone. Hours passed, and I remained parked outside, unable to leave. I replayed the events of the past weeks in my mind, analyzing every detail, every conversation. I thought about our wedding day, the vows we exchanged, and how I had shattered those promises with my infidelity. The realization that I had driven Jake into another woman's arms was a bitter pill to swallow. Eventually, Jake emerged from the house alone. His expression was unreadable, a mask of calm detachment that had become all too familiar. He got into his car and drove away, unaware that I had been watching. I waited a few minutes before driving back home, my mind a chaotic jumble of thoughts and emotions. That night, as I lay in bed next to him, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with questions I was too afraid to ask. Was he in love with her? Did he plan to leave me for her? The uncertainty gnawed at me, a relentless torment that I couldn't escape. The days that followed were a blur of anxiety and dread. I continued to act normal, hiding my suspicions, but the tension between us was palpable. Jake's late nights persisted, and I found myself drowning in a sea of doubt and regret. Every time he walked through the door, I wondered where he had been, who he had been with. The thought of him finding solace in another woman's arms was a constant, painful reminder of my own mistake. I knew I couldn't go on like this. The uncertainty was killing me, eating away at my sanity. I needed to confront him, to face the truth, whatever it might be. One evening, as he sat at the dinner table, I gathered my courage and spoke up. "Jake, we need to talk," I said, my voice trembling. He looked up, his expression guarded. "What is it?" he asked, his tone polite but distant. "I need to know where you've been going, who you've been seeing," I said, my heart pounding in my chest. "I can't keep living like this, Jake. If you're with someone else, I deserve to know." He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes searching mine. Finally, he sighed, a weary sound that spoke of his own exhaustion. "I'm not cheating on you, Sarah," he said quietly, "but I have been seeing someone." His words hit me like a sledgehammer. "Who?" I demanded, my voice breaking. "A therapist," he replied, his eyes never leaving mine. "I've been seeing a therapist. I needed help dealing with everything that happened between us, and I didn't know how to tell you. The woman you saw me with is my therapist. We've been talking about our marriage, about how to move forward." Relief washed over me, mingled with guilt and shame. I had assumed the worst, let my fears and insecurities drive a wedge between us. "Jake, I'm so sorry," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. I thought you were with someone else." He reached across the table and took my hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "I know," he said softly. "And I'm sorry for not telling you sooner. I just didn't know how. I've been struggling, Sarah, but I'm trying to work through it, for us." In that moment, I realized how deeply my actions had hurt him, how much pain he had been silently enduring. Our journey to healing would be long and difficult, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. We still had a chance, a fragile opportunity to rebuild what we had lost. And I was determined to seize it, to fight for our marriage with everything I had. But the relief was short-lived. The days that followed were a roller coaster of emotions. Jake's sessions with his therapist continued, and while I was glad he was seeking help, I couldn't shake the lingering doubts and insecurities. Every time he left for an appointment, I felt a pang of jealousy, a fear that he was sharing his deepest thoughts with someone else, someone who might understand him better than I ever could. I tried to be supportive, but the anxiety gnawed at me, a constant companion that I couldn't silence. I found myself checking his phone again, looking for any signs of deception. There were none, but the fear remained, a shadow that loomed over our attempts to rebuild our relationship. I wanted to trust him, to believe that he was committed to healing our marriage, but my own guilt and insecurities kept getting in the way. One evening, as we sat together in the living room, I couldn't hold back any longer. "Jake, can we talk?" I asked, my voice trembling. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of patience and sadness. "What is it, Sarah?" he asked gently. "I'm scared," I admitted, tears welling up in my eyes. I'm scared that you're going to leave me, that you're going to find someone else. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I can't help feeling this way. He sighed, reaching out to take my hand. Sarah, I'm not going anywhere, he said softly. I'm committed to us, to working through this, but you have to trust me. We can't move forward if you're constantly doubting me. His words were like a balm to my wounded heart, but the fear didn't completely dissipate. It lingered, a reminder of the fragility of our situation. I nodded, squeezing his hand tightly. I'm trying, Jake, I whispered. I'm really trying. As the weeks turned into months, we continued our journey of healing, navigating the rocky terrain of rebuilding our trust and connection. There were good days filled with moments of laughter and closeness that reminded me of the love we once shared. But there were also difficult days, where the weight of my past mistakes threatened to pull us apart. Jake's therapy sessions became a cornerstone of our healing process. He started opening up to me more, sharing bits and pieces of his sessions, the insights he was gaining about himself and our relationship. It wasn't easy, but it was a start. We began attending couples therapy together, facing our issues head-on with the guidance of a professional. The process was painful, forcing us to confront the deep-seated issues that had led to our estrangement. We talked about our communication problems, the ways we had hurt each other, and our fears for the future. It was a raw, honest exploration of our marriage, stripping away the layers of resentment and pain that had accumulated over the years. Slowly, we began to rebuild our connection. We started going on dates again, rediscovering the joy of each other's company. We spent time talking, really talking, about our dreams, our fears, and our hopes for the future. The intimacy that had once felt lost began to return, tentatively at first, but growing stronger with each passing day. There were setbacks, moments of doubt and frustration that threatened to derail our progress. But each time, we found a way to come back to each other, to remember why we were fighting for our marriage. The journey was long and fraught with challenges, but it was worth it. We were learning to love each other again, to forgive, and to trust. Looking back, I realize how close we came to losing everything. My infidelity had shattered the trust between us, but Jake's resilience and our shared commitment to healing had given us a second chance. Our marriage was no longer the glossy, perfect image we had once projected, but something deeper and more authentic. It was a testament to our growth, our willingness to face our flaws and work through them together. We weren't perfect, but we were real, and in the end, that was what mattered most. Our love had survived the storm, and we were stronger for it, bound by a shared journey of redemption and renewal.